Which brings us to part 5, building the Notion of life system. Now, we've already laid a little bit of the groundwork in the previous part, but this is the one where we're really going to get into the meat of the matter. This is the chunky chapter. This has all of the databases, all of their functionalities, and we're going to build that entirely from scratch. Now, the first database, the first element that we're starting with is the action tracker. And actions are the unique actions that we take every single day. We also have habits, which are actions that we repeat, but these are all the unique actions that we take every single day. And every action that we take is a vote for the person that we want to be, the vote for the person that we want to become. And in order to become that person, we need to take consistent action every single day. Now, the way we're going to go through this chapter is we're going to look at an element. Then we're going to look at all of the connections it has to other elements in the database. We're going to look at the key goal of the element. We'll have a little bit of theory, and then we're actually going to build it inside of Notion. Now, feel free to skip the theory part if you want. Like with everything in this masterclass, I can highly recommend checking it out. But if you just want to do the building part, every little mini sub-chapter has a part of theory, has a part of practice, so then you know. The action tracker is connected to the daily review. During our daily review, we check in with all of the action items that came into our inbox. We clear our inbox, and we also look at the action items that we scheduled for the day ahead. It's also related to our weekly review, where we sort of have a quick little overview of all the actions that we completed in the past week. It's related to our project tracker, because we want to see per project which actions are related to it, right? So we're going to have contextual actions for every project that we're working on. It is also related to the monthly review, which we'll explore later. It is related to the knowledge database in the way that when we have a meeting template, which is basically the place in which we take meeting notes, that we can immediately add all of the actions to our action tracker. And yeah, that is the element connections that it has. Now, over here, you can see the action tracker happens on the lowest level of this hierarchy. So it is something that we do on a daily basis. It has a very short feedback loop, and we mostly check in with it during our daily review. Okay. The key goal of the action tracker is to capture, clarify, process, and execute. So what do we mean by this? Capturing means that we want to capture all of the action items that come in throughout the day. David Allen has a very beautiful quote: "The mind is for having ideas, not for keeping them." So we are going out and about. We're just doing our things during our daily life, and all of a sudden an idea pops up, right? It's like, oh, I should not forget to do that particular thing. If we just keep that in our minds, it's going to be gone within a few minutes, right? If we just keep a list of everything that needs to happen in our minds, we're going to be overwhelmed. We're going to get half of it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to capture that specific action item. We want to put it inside of an inbox. Once we put it inside of the inbox, then we want to clarify, because as we were writing it down, we might have just jotted down a very quick note like take home food. And then later on you empty your inbox, you're like, take home food. What exactly did I mean by that? So that is where we're going to clarify all of our action items. So we're going to say, yes, I need to take home food at 6 o'clock, and it needs to be vegetables because we're doing this low carb diet. So we want to clarify more what we actually meant with that particular action item. Then the next thing is we want to process it, which is basically putting it in the part of the system that it is related to. And that is why we have that connection to the project tracker I showed you earlier. Every action needs to be contextual. Every action needs to be related to a specific project. And then the last thing that we do is we either delete it, very often that doesn't happen, or we execute it. So just like that, we started with a random thing that just came in during the day, and then we captured it, we clarify it, we process it, and then ultimately we execute on it. So that is the key goal of the action tracker. Let's open that up in Notion and actually build ourselves a very basic action tracker. So the first thing that we do, and we're going to do this for all of the different elements, is we go into the database collection zone. And then inside of this database collection zone, I'm going to create a database, but I'm actually going to turn it into a full page rather than an inline. And basically what this does, I'll just give this the name real quick, is that over here it's basically going to make a page but instead of this page being a regular page, it's going to be a database. So over here, we now have our action tracker database. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add this little fire emoji, because this emoji will always denote the action tracker, right? Consistency in design. And then I'm also going to add the cover. I'm just going to say Notion of Life covers. It's going to be in planning and execution, action tracker, and we have a custom database cover. Okay, basic structure of the database. The first thing that we want to do is we want to add all of the different properties that are needed for the action tracker. Now I'm going to add a few pages in here just as placeholders so that it looks a bit more clean. The first property that we have is the action name, right? So this is going to be the actual action item, the actual task, the actual to-do that we put inside of this database. So we're going to put this action name. Then the second one, which I would normally have done, is give a priority. And the way we do that is we create a select tag. And like I showed you earlier, we could have like first priority, second priority, etc. Now, I used to have priorities for a long time. I used priority systems for a long time. And there's many different systems that you can use. You can have the big win system. You can have the 1-3-5. There's many different ways that you can have a priority list. But actually, for this new iteration of a Notion of Life, we've deleted this priority. And there's a very particular reason for this. It's because we're going to be time blocking our actions in combination with the Notion calendar and our project database. I'm going to show you later how that works. But for now, we're just going to remove the priority property rather. If you want, you can add it. But for now, we're just going to delete that one. Okay, so what else do we need? We have an action. Well, we want to know, when do we do this action? So we create an action date. Now, instead of calling this a deadline, we call it an action date. I personally don't like the word deadline. Like the word dead is literally in there. It's very stress-inducing. It's very anxiety-inducing. And also, I like to approach my life in a way where most things are done on my timeline, right? The moment there's a deadline, it insinuates someone else made a timeline for me. And yes, sometimes having a deadline can force you to, become a bit more motivated, put a bit more effort and time in. Like this is a great example. I set a deadline for myself to record this masterclass these days. Okay, I'm putting myself to work in this time period. But usually speaking, I just want to have action dates. They're the aimed date that I want to do something. But we're not perfect, right? Principle number 5. We are not perfect. We're always going to mess things up, and that is perfectly fine. We're never going to complete the action item list perfectly. We're always going to make little mistakes. And the moment we have a deadline and it feels very rigid, it feels very stressed, the tension, right? The tension, you can feel it in your body. That is something we don't want, right? There's already a lot going on in the world. We want to keep our own life as ease, as peaceful as possible. So that's why we're calling it an action date. And this is also a theme you will see throughout the system. I value being productive, but I also really value being productive in a calm way, right? We want to enjoy the ride. We don't want the goal to sort of override the process. Okay, so that's going to be the action date. So then what else do we need? Well, we want to track if the action is done, yes or not. We could do this either by giving it a status property, which would give us different possibilities for a status. So for example, we could say it's not started, it's in progress, it is done, it is to be reviewed. So we could give like different levels of status to an action item. I think this makes more sense when you're working together in a team and there's different phases, different stages of an action item. But personally, I just use a very simple checkbox. And it's just a binary. Is it done? Yes or no? Just like that. No clue why we changed that back. Okay. And the nice thing about the checkbox property is that most properties cannot go smaller than this amount. But the checkbox property, we can actually drag just like this. So that just looks a little bit cleaner. Okay. The next thing that we're going to add is a status tag. And inside the status tag, later on, we're going to add something in here called the parent. I mean, we're going to add it now, but we're not going to use it yet. And we're going to have someday and waiting. Now, I stole this idea from August Bradley's Pillars Pipeline and Vault system. I don't really use it, but I'm just keeping it in here in case you think it might be helpful. You can also delete this part. It's not entirely necessary, but yeah, the idea is basically that you can have an action item, and when you've done something, right, you, for example, send something out to someone, you can change it to waiting. And then you know, like, hey, I already made the first action here, but I still need a reply from someone before I can move on to the next part. And similarly, there might be certain action items where you're like, hey, this is a really cool idea, maybe a year from now. So I just want to capture it somewhere. Reason I don't use this a lot is because it's very easy to over capture things. And yeah, I feel like whenever we get something that's not part of a process and that doesn't really have a way for us to relate to it, it usually just clutters and grows out. But we're just going to put it in here for now because it does have a process somewhere. But like I said, I don't really use it a lot. Except for the parent tag. That one we're going to use a lot. So that one we really need to have in there. Okay. Then we're going to have a whole bunch of connections and a whole bunch of formulas. I'm not going to show all of them yet because they will come up as we're connecting to a new database. So the last thing I'm going to add over here is actually say a last edited time, which is basically automatically going to show us the last time that this one has been edited. Now, what you just saw over there is that when I had this bad boy a little bit tucked in, you can see all of the rows sort of moving down. And personally, I think this is really fugly. So what we can do is we can actually go into the database settings and we can say change inside of this layout that all the columns will be wrapped. And the moment we unwrap the columns, it's just going to put everything to the side, which is basically going to hide content. So if you want to show all of the content in somewhere, you don't want to wrap the columns, or rather you do want to wrap the columns. In this case, we don't because yeah, I like having it just vertically overviewed. Okay. So we have looked at the rows and columns. We've looked at a few of the property types. Now let's look at the database layouts, the filters, and the sorts. This is where we're going to get into the first little bit of magic inside of the system. I'm just going to put this down a little bit. Actually going to give this execution databases. Nice little thing that you can do is over here now I put a heading 1. But actually, I think the heading 1 looks a little bit too big. I want to turn it into a heading 2. What you can do is you can say /turn, which stands for turn into, heading, H stands for heading, 2. Turning into heading 2. Boom. Just like that. You can take blocks and with keyboard shortcuts actually play around with them much faster. Okay, so we're going to open this one up, and I'm actually going to add some dummy content in here. So this is action item 1, and we'll just drag. So what happens here is if we take a cell like this and we grab this little circle and we drag it down, we automatically duplicate the value into all of the other cells, right? This could also be done for dates. Let's say I want to have these all done for 25. Like that, we can drag them in there. Alternatively, what we could do, let's say we would have 26 over here. We can also say Command C, drag the columns that we want, Command V. That would also work. Okay, so we're going to get action item 2, action item 3, action item 4, action item 5, and action item 6. Okay, this would be what we call the master table. So a master table is basically the overview of any database in which we have all of the properties and all of the entries available in one single place. And I'm going to call this one the master table. Of course, we're going to give it the fire emoji. Now, here we're going to get into a little more of the complicated stuff. So the beauty about Notion databases is that we can create different views for a specific database. So what that means is I can create a custom view that only shows me a particular slice of this database and also in a particular way, right? So over here, I'm going to add a view. I'm going to say I'm going to add an empty view. I'm going to say fire. I'm actually going to call this one the daily actions. I'm going to say done. Now, at the moment, you can see the only difference in these two views is that this one goes from 1 to 5 and this one goes from 5 to 1. But when I make a change in one of these views, it also changes in the other view. So it's still the same database, but it's just a different window into this particular database. And then inside this view, we're actually going to make a few modifications. And that was no pun intended, but I heard it as I was saying it. What we're going to do, the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to create a filter for this database. Because as you can see over here, I called this one daily actions. And daily actions implies I only want to see the action items that are due for today. So the way we do this is by applying a filter. Filters are basically ways of saying, I only want to see a particular entry if it meets one of these requirements. So for example, I could say, I only want to see entries inside this table that in which the action name contains the number 1. And right now it's only going to show me the action name that has a number 1 inside of it. And let's, for example, make this one 1. Now it's going to show me all 3 of these. So we can filter a very specific slice of this database. Now, the filter that we want to create for this particular daily actions is we want to say, I only want to see action items that have an action date for today. So I'm going to say add a filter, action date. I'm going to say the start date is. Now, one thing we could do is we could click here and say start date is 24th of December. And actually, we did not put any of them on the 24th of December, so let's just add a few here. Boop. And we're going to see everything for the 24th of December. But if we put the filter like this, and tomorrow comes around, it's no longer going to be the 24th, and then the list is no longer going to work. Luckily, Notion allows us to set dynamic filters. So instead of giving it a date, I'm going to say the start date is today. Boom. Now, what Notion will do is every day it will simply check, what date is it today? It is 24th. Okay, so today the filter is going to be action date is going to be 24th. So that is the first filter that we're going to set. Now, the second filter that we want is whenever we click one of these checkboxes, we want the action item to disappear because we've finished the action item. So we're going to say when done is unchecked. So I only want to show action items in which done is unchecked. The moment I check this, boom, it will now disappear. But here we have to pay close attention. Clicking this box does not mean we're deleting this entry from the database. No, rather it means we're deleting it from this view, because in this view, we only want to see ones that are unchecked. But the moment I will look in this master table, you can see that these action items still exist in there. So ultimately, at the end, when we have this whole system and you're using this for many years, like I am, you're going to have an action database with thousands of action items in this master table. But still, in my daily action list, I only see the action items due for today. And this is how we use different views, right? So we have a different view with certain filters showing us a very, very particular part of this action tracker database. Another thing that we can do is that we can sort our databases. And this is basically changing the order in which we see entries. So for example, over here, we now see action item 1, 4, 5, 6. Let's actually change these back to 2 and 3. And they're here in chronological order. What we can do is we can say, I want to add a sort, and I actually want to sort this list by action name. And instead of having it ascending, I want to have it descending, meaning it starts with the highest number. Instead, we could also say, I want to sort it by action date. And right now you can see, first it shows the 24th, then the 26th. Maybe I want to have it the other way around. I want it to show the action items planned further in the future first, right? So we can sort the order of the different entries in a database. Now, a good example of this is actually with the priorities. So I'm just going to add that for here, and we're going to say priorities. Priority. If you want to use a priority system, this is how you could build it. We could say priority. I'm going to call this not the big win. Just recolor this. You can recolor things by going over here. Right, so let's say orange. First priority would be green. Second priority would be yellow. Third priority would be red, for example. And then in here, I usually like to add, for the big win, you can add emojis anywhere, any Notion page, anywhere in the system, also in other websites, by on a MacBook doing Control Command Spacebar, or on a Windows doing Windows key and the period key. you can open that up, and let's say, for example, boom, that would be the big win. And then we could even add an emoji to one of these tags. And then what we can do with a sort is we could say, let's go into these daily actions. Let's put all of these for 24th. We could add a sort that says sort them by their priority. And it's now going to follow the same logic that we made in this list over here. So if I were to drag this one inside that list, it's going to change. But it's now automatically going to sort our action list by priority. So that would be an example of how we can use sorting to create an action list. But for now, I'm just going to hide this one because we're not going to be using it. And we've created a very simple action list. Over here, we still have a table layout, because this is another beautiful thing that Notion allows us to do. It allows us to create different types of layouts. The 7 layouts that we have is we have the table, we have a board, which is sort of a Kanban board style. And let me just show you how that could work. Group by status. We could have it like this, which would be more for classical project management in groups. And we could like move the action items around. We can also have a timeline, which is what we're going to use later for project tracker. We can have a calendar view where we have the action items laid down by their date. We can have a list view. We can have a gallery view. And we can have charts. And we're going to look at the charts later. Gallery view, one of my favorite ones. Also going to look at it later. But for now, we want to pick this list layout because this is a very clean and simple layout that we can use for our daily actions. And what we want to do is we say properties. I want it to show the done checkbox because that is very important to be able to click that as the day progresses. And then I'm actually going to drag that in front of here. Now, one more thing that we can add, which is for now, we're just going to add it. And in a later part of the system, we're going to show you how this is done. Is that we want to have a little formula. I'm just going to grab this one from my other system. And we're going to call this, I'm going to grab a formula, time planned. We're going to paste that in here. And what this formula does is it basically checks for what time of day is an action item planned, because we're going to be using time blocking later on. So that means we're going to give a time slot for each of the different action items. So for example, action item number 1, it's not only due for today, but it's due for today from 10 a.m. till 11:30 a.m. And then, 11:30 a.m. Now over here, you're going to see that this formula has now changed to the time planned for this action item is between 10 and 11:30. And the reason we format it like this is so that inside of this list, we can show ourselves this formula and we can add it in front of our action list. And then we'll say, hide the page icon and sort by date descending. So this means we see the soonest upcoming action item on the top. So if I were to take this one, I'm actually going to call this one December 24th. Also going to include time and date. This one's actually going to be for 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Maybe that should also be p.m. actually. And I lied before, actually it's the wrong order, so we're going to say action 8 date ascending. Now we can see it is in chronological order for that specific day. And what we've also added to this formula is that the moment an action item is happening right here, right now, the color is changed to orange and it's changed into a fire emoji. So simply by putting this action time between 12:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m., and currently it is actually a little past 12 here, then it shows this one is active for right now. And then over here we can add one last action date. And we're going to actually call this one, let's say 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Hey there. Just a brief intermission to let you know that you can get free access to the masterclass worksheet by dropping your email address in the link down below. And inside of this worksheet, you will find a step-by-step outline to track your progress as you're going throughout this masterclass. You will also find the complete slide deck that we are using in this video. You will find all of the formulas ready to copy and paste, meaning you don't have to write them out all yourself, but you can just plug them into your system and start using them straight away. And this one is a really good one. You will find the 2 original reflection databases, and this will literally save you hours of setup time. You can just plug them into your system and start using them straight away. And then just as a tiny little cherry on top, you will also get all of the database and template covers that we are using in this masterclass. So if you want to grab all this stuff for free right now, then drop your email address down below and I'll send it to you straight away. Boom. Just like that, we have a very simple action list with all of our daily actions. And whenever we take one off, it disappears from this list. Very simple, very practical action list. Formulas we're going to get in later on. You can also go to the, I think it's chapter number 7 in this video. You can find all of the formulas. But for now, this is the action list that we wanted to build. Now, the last thing that we want to do is we want to add this view to the execution zone, because the execution zone is about execution. It's about taking action. So that's everything that we need for the day. So another very powerful feature that Notion allows us to do is it allows us to create linked views of databases. So basically, like we just did inside of this database, right? We have these different views of this same database, right? Making one change over here is also going to make that change over here, and vice versa. We can also take one of these views and drag it almost to a different part of the system. Now, we're not actually dragging it, but functionally we are. So basically what we do is we say over here, /linked, which pops up in this menu, linked view of a database. So I'm going to say linked view of a database, and then it's asking me, what database do you want to get this link from? I'm going to say I'm going to grab this from the action tracker database that we just created. And then from that database, I want to copy this daily actions view. And simply by clicking here, boom, I can add the view right here to this page. Now, very important to note here is that it only allows us to pick the views that we made in the original database. So were I to add a different view over here, it will not allow me to select that later like we just did. So we have to create the view inside of the main database. And then later on, we can just simply say, from this action tracker, I want to have that view, right? So this is important to note because it's the main reason why we have all these databases in one central place and we make all the views inside of this main database. Now, the way you can recognize a linked database is by this little arrow on the top left corner. When there's a little arrow on the top left corner, that means it's a linked version of the database. Whereas if this one was a inline database, you can see there would not be an arrow on this icon, right? So the little arrow over here signals that it's a linked version. Now I'm going to hide this title because less is more. And by using this fire emoji very consistently, we already know this is the action tracker database. So this way we need less content to still signal to us the same thing. And just like that, we have created our first element, the action tracker inside of the execution zone with all of our daily actions. We had a look at the layouts and the filters. We looked at database views. We looked at linked databases, and we looked at a formula sneak peek. Now, the last thing that we want to do is we want to capture, or actually it's the first thing that we want to do, but the last thing I want to show you is that we want to capture our action items into our action tracker. Now, for a long time, I used to do this inside the Notion of Life system, or actually I used to show people this inside the Notion of Life system by sort of adding a button that adds new actions over here. But actually, what I personally do is I have an external automation that helps me quick capture action items. So the way I do that is I have a hotkey, Shift Command D, pops up this menu. Over here, I can add a new action item, and boom, just like that, it would be added to this action tracker database. This is a much smoother way of doing it, but it's an external automation. So at the end of the masterclass, I will show you how to build this for yourself. Similarly, there is a tool called Save to Notion, which also allows you to capture things from the internet. Also, that we will show you later. So we're not going to build this inside the system. We're actually going to use external automations because it's a much smoother way of doing it.